It is Thursday. You know what that means. It's Black and Gold Thursdays. Jarrett Bailey. That is my friend Nick Farabaugh from Pittsburgh Sports Now. Hey fella, what's going on over there on the south side?
Yeah, man, a lot going on. The pads aren't popping quite yet, but the
Sure.
shorts are jumping. I guess I don't know. I guess that's how you would say it. The jerseys are on. There's some things going on. Coaching's coaching. Football is kind of back, not completely, but you can start to feel the taste of it, right? It's
Yeah,
it's
you the kind of in parentheses followed
yes.
by the back with exclamation points at the end. We've still got a couple months till training camp, but football activities are taking place at respective team facilities, and the Steelers are no different. A lot of new faces for Pittsburgh that have been very much welcomed by the fan base, especially on the offensive line with the selection of Broderick Jones at left tackle, Isaac Samalo being signed over from Philadelphia, Nick Herbig coming in. What have you seen that from the offensive line? Has anything caught your eye during OTA so far?
First of all, Dan Moore is jacked. I mean that like he has completely reworked his body. Like I think he said he was 310 last year, and now he's like 320, and it's all
Mm.
muscle. There's not fat. He is like lean, and he is huge. He completely reworked his diet. It's really an impressive transformation. Second is that Broderick Jones is getting like a ton of preferential treatment, and by that I mean he's getting the most coaching, and that makes
Mm.
sense. Obviously, he's the first round draft pick. He's your future left tackle, or you hope he is, but he is the guy getting the most focus. Um, I would have some caution about them being completely good right out of the gate. I think they're going to take some time to gel. The whole new left side probably.
Yeah.
I think the right side's going to be fine. But I think you're going to see some lapses. I think that's something that a lot of guys have cautioned about. This thing isn't necessarily going to get jumping right away.
Yeah.
There's some new techniques that's got to be learned by some guys. So the O line I think is going to be a little. It's going to be a little rough, especially Broderick Jones starts week one in pass pro. I just don't think it's going to be completely there yet. I think run game though. I think that's going to hit the ground running, man. They've got such an impressive group of run blockers up there. It really is a good group. James Daniels is a plus run blocker. Samalo is a plus run blocker. Broderick Jones is a plus run blocker. Even if Dan Moore's in there, right? That's a plus run blocker. The only guy who's really not like a plus run blocker on the line is Chooks.
Mhm.
It's going to be a really good run blocking unit. I can't not mention Darnell Washington there. He makes the sled drills. Like I don't really care about putting people in shorts and it's
I
May,
saw
so
your tweet about this.
like it doesn't really matter, but like you just watch the dude go like through the sled and just lift up the sled and get full extension, and it's like, oh, the hands are perfectly placed. Oh, the footwork was great. And then you just see him like on tape destroying guys, and you're like, well, that makes sense. Like, it's just really not easy for rookie tight ends to come in and just be really good blockers.
Mhm.
And I remember Zach Gentry when he came through was awful at that. Muth was awful at that when he was coming through. So for him to kind of be already there, and they don't really have to teach him much. It's kind of impressive. I'm not gonna lie. So I think they'll be hitting the ground running, running game wise. I think it'll be a solid O line though. I think it will be, especially the further the season goes along. I think that second half of the year, I think they could be a really good O line, a top half of the league O line at that, which is I don't think we've been able to say that since at least 2020, certainly
Yeah.
2019. You can definitely say that, but 2020 you start to see the decline. But I think they're going to start to kind of get back up to where they were.
And I think that's why my expectations in terms of the offense, it's going to be very lean more into the run centric type of offense that we were kind of accustomed to early and mid 2000s. And then the 2010s, Ben, AB, and Le'Veon kind of spent 5 to 6 years of kind of turning the tide in terms of it being more of a pass first offense. When we think of expectations for Kenny Pickett in this offense, I tweeted the other day, I think that a realistic expectation for him would be similar to Mitch's second year in Chicago, with 3,500 yards, 24 touchdowns, around the 10 interception range, and they're going to lean into the run game. That's why I don't see like the yards blowing anybody away. Thoughts on Najee Harris? I mean, there's a lot of conversations about him, potentially breaking a franchise record in terms of running yards. I've seen a few people tweet that, if the run offense, if the running game is clicking on all cylinders, this would be the perfect time just to really feed him, and potentially unlock that full potential that everybody was kind of waiting to see since he's been drafted.
Yeah, I've always been slightly pessimistic on Najee for a few reasons. He's just really inefficient. He's been a volume monster. That's kind of what he is. To this point in his career, right? Like the yards per carry isn't great. The rushing yards over expectations not great. The rushing success isn't great. Just like all of the metrics that is like efficiency, yards per carry is the one that I think matters the least because I just don't care about it. There's so many factors that overlooks, but like you look even deeper into some of the factors and it's not great. But then you also look at the tape and you're like, this dude had a awful offensive line. I mean, for his running style, it is a terrible offensive line. In the second half of last season, I think we finally started to see Najee Harris really kind of feel himself. And I think that's the Najee you're going to see. I think, I don't know if a franchise record for rushing yards is what he'll get. I think Jaylen Warren's going to eat into his snaps a little bit. Yes. By the way, Jaylen Warren
he looks huge.
Huge. I remember we walked into OTAs the first day, saw Jaylen Warren, and someone asked, "Is that James Conner?" Because that's how big he is right now. Like his quads are massive. He's gotten bigger everywhere. He is huge right now, and that's a good thing. He really wears it well too. He doesn't look any slower. But I think Najee is interesting because this should be the year he's finally clicking. Right, the vision issues they kind of got fixed at the end of last year. He didn't have to worry about the Liz Frank injury anymore. And during that second half of last year, especially the last like 5 to 6 weeks of the year, he was like plus 50 in rushing yards over expectation. So the efficiency started to come along. And that was the thing that really kind of put me on. I was like, all right, Najee's here, I think. I think this is the Najee Harris we saw at Alabama.
I think once the Saints game happened and he took off and the offense really leaned on the run game throughout the entire contest, I think that was kind of their coming out party as a unit saying, okay, this is starting to click.
Yes. I would say that was a coming out party as a unit. And once the O-line started to click, Najee started to click.
Yeah.
And that's because Najee Harris, finally got a yard to run before he had to like make 3 moves in the backfield, which I think is something to note. And so, his numbers are like, okay, whatever. They're volumetric. A lot of them aren't efficiency based, but like there's a lot of positive things that suggest to me Najee Harris is going to be a pretty good running back this year. And he's a guy that was left out, I think, the top 15 running backs today in PFF. And I don't think after this, I don't think after the season that's going to be the case. I think he's a top 15 running back in the NFL. I really do. And I think you're going to see it this year. I think that they have a really good run blocking team this year. I think even the receivers are good at run blocking, which I think is going to help him get a few more explosive plays, 20-plus yard runs that we maybe haven't seen. We saw a little bit of that late last year too. Yeah. I just think Najee Harris is a guy that's getting overlooked a little bit around the NFL community as, a guy that maybe hasn't had the most ideal first 2 years, but that second half of last season, I think that was the Najee you're going to see.
So we talked about, I mentioned Kenny Pickett briefly in the expectations that he'll have coming into this year, but the receiving group that he has, it just seems to keep getting more beefed up in terms of depth. They trade for Allen Robinson, Calvin Austin's back. They signed Hakeem Butler, who was a household name for XFL fans. By the way, rocking 21 for Hakeem Butler, power move. Love that. Love the aesthetic. We talked about Darnell Washington a little bit. Muth obviously still being there. Like he's got guys and depth, and if 75 to 80% of them live up to the potential that Steelers fans have for them, he's going to have a lot of mouths to feed. But that's what you want for a second-year quarterback is having as much options as he possibly can have. I'm liking what I see right now compared to this time last year. A lot more confident in this receiving group.
Yeah, it's interesting because George Pickens is now a second-year guy, which means you should have more confidence in him that he's not a rookie, right? So he could be a superstar. I don't think we know what he's going to be year 2, but he could take that leap and be one of the best receivers in the NFL. He's got that potential if he can get that route running just a little bit crisper.
Yeah, I was just about to say that's like the one bugaboo for Pickens is his route running ability. Outside of that, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, if he can do that, right, he can be a guy that mirrors, say, Mike Williams, Alshon Jeffrey, someone like that. I think could be a very realistic expectation for him. Deontay Johnson should bounce back. I know last season was a crazy year for him. No touchdowns, horrifically.
He had the same amount of touchdowns as you and I did, Nick Farabaugh.
Yeah, it was a tough year for Deontay, but
Yeah,
he's too good to me to not have a bounce back year, and they used him very weirdly last year. Allen Robinson has had some pretty bad tape over the past few years, but
sure.
he is the type of receiver they probably have been missing for a little bit. Guy that can play slot inside. Not going to get a ton of usage, but you don't really need him to. Can block. He's a veteran guy that Pickens and Deontay can go to if they need help. Calvin can go to. They have Calvin Austin, as you mentioned, who is obviously very intriguing. Hakeem Butler is a huge 6'5" guy who's fast. Needs to work on his concentration drops, but that's something to kind of work out. And then they have a few other guys to just look out for. The Anthony Millers of the world. That Anthony Miller was injured last year, and he probably
Yeah.
would have started in the slot last year had he not gotten injured. After the Claypool trade, he probably would have been the slot guy. So they brought him back for a reason. This is his opportunity. So I mean, they are deep at that room, and we'll see kind of how everything works out. But they have a rotation of 4 or 5 guys that they could probably play and play pretty comfortably. And then you also have to factor in the tight ends to that discussion, right? Fryermuth and Washington and those guys and what they're going to do, because Fryermuth's essentially a huge wide receiver. So I mean that's got to be factored in this conversation too. So Kenny Pickett has enough weapons to do what he wants if he can take that second year leap, and obviously that's the biggest thing. Whenever we're talking about anything, Kenny Pickett taking the leap is going to be the biggest thing to really narrow in.
Yeah, and the fact that they have all that depth, I don't foresee them doing anything. You remember a couple years ago, whenever they only rostered 5 receivers and kept Ebron as like that kind of like basically just another receiver. I don't see them doing that just because of the depth that they have. But where does the line get drawn on the guys who do make the roster? Because you mentioned Anthony Miller, Gunner, they're going to be trying to earn roster spots, but there's just a lot of guys there, and eventually the line has to be drawn somewhere. Where do you think it gets drawn at?
Yeah, there's 3 locks in Robinson, Pickens, and Johnson. I think everyone else is fair game. Now, I think Austin has a more inside track than most of them because he brings a skill set that no one else does. But I think you can't completely count out that he might not make it.
Yeah.
So you have Calvin Austin. It's probably going to be 6 receivers, right? It's going to be, I think Miles Boykin has a very good chance to make the team because he's such a great special team. Special teams are going to decide some of these spots. Can Hakeem Butler play special teams? I think that's going to be as part of it, especially being a gunner. Who's going to be the return man? Because if Gunnar Olszewski isn't the return man this year, he's not making the roster, right?
No.
If Calvin Austin beats him out, that's the way to do it. Jordan Bird's in that conversation too, another UDFA. So I think returning is going to be part of that factor. I think you have special teams, and I think the other one, you can have the ability to kind of take the best receiver after that. So you have a special teams outside guy who's probably going to be Boykin. You have the slot return guy who I think right now the front runner would be Calvin Austin.
Yeah.
Then I think after that you can take whoever the best receiver is as your 6th, whether that be Anthony Miller, whether that be Hakeem Butler, whether that be someone else we haven't even talked about. Maybe there's someone in that room that just stands out throughout the entire training camp and preseason that we haven't talked about and we didn't see coming. But I think that's kind of how it works. I think they'll keep 6 this year. I think it makes sense to keep 6. So we'll kind of see how it works out. But I anticipate that this will be a really competitive room. And they're deep. They have 8 legitimate guys that have seen NFL game day action. So we'll see.
Well, the thumbnail is going to say OTAs and Kenny Pickett year 2. So we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Pickett a little bit more. You and I have had conversations about this multiple times over. I wasn't a fan of the pick at the time. I think you were a little bit hesitant on it as well. And there was growing pains, obviously, when you throw in a rookie with that offensive line, trying to figure things out. His first start being in Buffalo, in which they didn't put up any sort of fight whatsoever. But down the stretch, there was something there, obviously, especially late in games. The 2 game-winning drives against Baltimore and Vegas, respectively, opened a lot of eyes, mine included. Now, there are things that obviously still need cleaned up and whatnot, but that comes with the offense as a whole, not necessarily all on Kenny. I think if he is somewhere in the range of the 16th to 18th best quarterback in the league this year and everything else clicks on the cylinders that they are expected to click on, the Steelers are a playoff team. He doesn't need to be Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Herbert, the echelon of those guys, if everything else is taking care of itself. So I brought up the comp to Mitch in year 2. If he's Mitch in year 2, 24 touchdowns, 12-ish interceptions, 3,300 yards, I love what the Steelers can possibly be. What are your expectations for Kenny Pickett year 2?
Yeah, well, there's a few things I want to see from him. First of all, I want to see him continue that momentum from the second part of the year. I don't want to see turnover-worthy plays like we saw in the first half where he was just confused, completely bugged out by zone coverages and all this stuff. I don't want to see that. I want to see a comfortable quarterback. Second, I want to see him play more in structure. I want to see him stand in that pocket and not try to play backyard brawl as much. And the reason I say that is because he ran himself into a lot of sacks last year, a lot of pressure, and he's great out of structure. We know he can throw off platform. We know he can do that stuff when it goes to jailbreak, right? But he needs to learn how to play a little bit more in structure because that stuff's more stable. That'll be better for his long-term quarterbacking future. And if he can do that, I think that's actually where you could see him take the biggest leap because it's the weakest part of his game is just standing in there, not drifting in the pressure. If he can do that, I'm telling you right now, I think they might have something here in Kenny Pickett. That's the biggest thing. If we start to see improvement of him standing in the pocket and reading and firing and doing that stuff, I think Kenny Pickett can be a very, very solid NFL quarterback to the point where, he's a top 15 quarterback at that point. He's in the Kirk Cousins tier of quarterbacks if he does that. I think that's where you kind of look. I think that's the type of leap. That's the ideal type of leap we're talking about with him. I think his accuracy is pretty solid for where it is. I'd like to see him take more shots down the football field this year. And I don't just mean throw go balls to George Pickens. I'd like to see them run posts. I'd like to see them get play action and let him rip it. I'd like to see them do that, and I'd like to see them kind of diversify this playbook a little bit for him now that he's in year 2. Let Kenny be Kenny. And he can do that. He did that at Pitt. I think it's time to let it rip and kind of see where he goes from here. So those are the 3 big things I want to see from him. I know he's going to be a leader. I don't need to worry about that. The intangibles are what makes Kenny Pickett intriguing. That was the one thing that everyone said. Well, the tape isn't, so great out of Pitt. It's solid. It's not, but it's not elite, right? There's more flashes on Malik Willis's tape, even Desmond Ritter's tape. There's more flashes there, but Kenny Pickett's intangibles are second to none. He's a winner. I have no idea how to describe him other than that. He is a winner that just walks to a locker room and commands that locker room. So the intangibles are A+++++. And that's what I think is going to allow Kenny Pickett to have an environment around him that supports him. And so whether he makes that leap or not, I think that's the question. But he's a tireless worker, and he's a guy that has the locker room on his side. So you don't have a Zach Wilson situation where the locker room's not going to go behind him. Well, no, the locker room's going to go out there for Kenny Pickett. They love Kenny Pickett. Everyone in that locker room loves Kenny Pickett because he's a winner, and he's a guy that they want to play for. So we'll see. I think those 3 qualities, though, that I mentioned, the pocket presence is a big one, and I think the reading coverage is part of that. Is the second part because that's going to be what's in structure, right? That's what's going to be about, staying in structure and making plays. And then the third, just carry on the momentum. Don't make dumb decisions against zones and all of that. And I think Kenny Pickett could be a guy where if he has a Mitch Trubisky-like stat line, you've got a guy at that point where you probably have a solid run game. You have enough of a passing game to where maybe you get a few explosive plays here or there. You don't turn the ball over a lot. And the defense is going to be good. They're going to have a good defense. So this team could easily go 10-7, 11-6 with that type of production. I'm not sure if, a division win would be there, but wild card, sure.
When I do 2 of these a year, going game by game for every team to, make a full predictions list, I don't think a division's out of the question per se. And it's not to say that I think that they are better necessarily than the Bengals, but you look at the schedule that they face, it is easier than that of the Bengals, and I think that will play into their favor. Plus, they play the AFC South, the NFC West. That is going to be very helpful. That early season trip to Vegas, the Raiders are going to be horrible. I fully expect them to beat Pittsburgh as they always do. But you look at their schedule as a whole, man. Like there's not too many games where you're like, oh no, it's a pretty doable schedule.
Yeah, it's a very easy schedule for the first part of the year, specifically before the bye week. That's not a gauntlet. Those 5 games are fine. The 49ers are probably the toughest game on that list, to be quite honest with you, their very first game. The Browns, I mean, I know they're a talented roster, but if you're a divisional team, you feel like you should be able to win that one.
Yeah.
You got the Texans there, as you mentioned, Vegas. It's a fine schedule, but they should be able to win at least 3 of those games.
Yeah.
I think they're going to go through warts, as I mentioned. I don't think they're going to be like a perfect team out of the gate, so they could drop a game that they probably shouldn't. But it's not a team that should have these obvious losses. It's you don't really go into a game that this year on that schedule and say that's an automatic loss.
Mm.
Yes, there are going to be games that they will lose. Yes, there are going to be games that they probably should lose. But they have a chance in every game this year. I don't feel like that there's like last year I thought, there were games where they just walked into and weren't going to win, right?
Sure.
That Eagles game last year, I was like, they're not winning that game.
No.
Once you saw how good
the Buffalo game as well,
like those were games like you're like, all right, they're not winning this game, right? Yeah. They're going to probably get crushed, and they got crushed. But this year, I don't think there's an obvious game on the schedule where you're like, they don't belong in that league. Sure. I think that they do. Maybe they're a year away from completely putting it all together. That's possible. But this team should be competitive with just about every team on that schedule and should probably win 10 games. I know the over-under is like 8.5 right now, which
that's the easiest money that you can make right now is betting them the over, I think.
Yeah, I think the over is a nice bet right there on the odds too. I think this is a better team than it was last year, and I don't think the schedule's like super hard compared to last year either. And people will point to like, oh, they played bad teams down the stretch, so it's probably why they won. Especially when you look at like the offense's improvement, that's one of the counteracting things. But like you look at the DVOA of it and stuff, and it's like that wasn't like a bad stretch of defense. It's like the defenses they faced weren't that bad, and Kenny Pickett played well. They ran the ball just over everyone they faced. They absolutely punished the Ravens. I know they only won that game on that late drive, but if you remember that game, they dominated the will of that game. And the reason they drove down the field late in that game was because the Ravens were just absolutely gassed because the O-line had bashed them all game, and Najee Harris and Jalen Warren were doing work. So, I would like to see them get a few more explosive plays. I think, a team that like this could be like, if you keep growing it and you build it the right way, and Kenny Pickett takes the steps, is one of those like early 2010s Ravens teams where you had Joe Flacco under center. Might not be the best quarterback, right? But they were a smash mouth team, beat you in the trenches, a defense you didn't want to face, opportunistic team, and they ran the ball and they ran it well with the talented, stable backs. I think that's kind of like what Mike Tomlin's starting to build here a little bit. I think they're kind of modeled in that way, which makes a lot of sense. The Ravens and the Steelers act very similarly throughout their histories, even though they're rivals.
What's the old saying? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and we see a lot of mirroring with the Steelers Ravens. Yeah, if Kenny is just a guy who plays efficiently and doesn't turn the ball over, doesn't mess things up, I think that the Steelers. Do you have them as a playoff team? Like penciled it as one of your playoff teams? I do.
Yeah, I do. I have them finishing third in the division, and I have them like being like the 7th wild card. I think that they'll scrape by in. I still think they're like a year away from completely taking that leap. I think, second year with Broderick Jones, getting Pickens in his third year, kind of just settling everything in. I think the defense still it's going to have a few hiccups here and there early on in the season. They're a young unit. So I think they're maybe just a year away, but like, let's not forget they have so many superstars on that defense to where they're going to have a significantly high floor because they have TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, and Minka, and now Pat Pete. And then the offense, to me, I think the potential undoing, the reason why I'm just not so in on them as much as like you are, right, which is like win the division, go for it, is.
Yeah, I was going to say, when did I become the Steelers fan? It's like, they're winning the division, damn it.
Yeah, right?
I feel like the tables have turned on that.
There is one factor that it just caused me to be like, okay, I can't fully buy in, and it's Matt Canada. I really think that
fair enough.
Could derail a lot of it. So I think that's the big factor, because I think Matt Canada could potentially hold back Kenny Pickett and Kenny Pickett's growth. And if you hold back Kenny Pickett, then, well, Kenny Pickett's also a factor that holds you back. And so I think that could lead them to a disappointing 9-8 season. I think you want them to make the playoffs, but I think I right now have them at like 10-7. And so yeah, it's a talented roster. They're in an absolute gauntlet of a division. All three of those teams, all four of these teams like should be decent. Like you look at the rosters on paper, the Browns are very talented. The Bengals are the Bengals. The Ravens are the Ravens. They should be good. Like all four of these teams should be better than most other teams, and the worst team in this division might be like 8-9. That's completely possible. But I think the Steelers should really be able to make the playoffs this year. I think they are one of the 7 best teams in the AFC if they play well enough.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like on paper, the AFC North looks like a division that could hold, like have 4 teams go to the playoffs. We said the same thing though last year about the AFC West, and obviously there was 2 black sheep of that group where the Raiders and Broncos were both just really bad. I don't think they're going to have 2 teams in the division that are going to be bad, but having all 4 of them, I mean, we haven't seen anything like that in quite some time where all 4 teams in a division make the playoffs. We'd have to go back and look to see when the last time that happened, where 4 teams in a division. It was before the division realignment, I'm pretty sure. I want to say it was like 01 or 2000, so something of that sort. I'm excited though, man. Like going into last season, I feel like a lot of fans, yes, they were happy that Kenny Pickett was selected, especially if they were Pitt guys. But there was a lot of uncertainty, and starting off the season 2-6, 3-7, and having to beat a bunch of teams down the stretch, and they came close to getting into the postseason. If not for the Jets, if the Jets have a competent quarterback in Week 18, the Steelers are a playoff team last year, which is crazy to think about. But I'm excited to see what they can put on the field this season. Last thing before we go, we haven't really talked much about the defense and the rookies, but Joey Porter Jr., Corey Trice, I'm very much looking forward to this defensive backfield under Pat Pete in the cornerback room. What have you seen from them?
Yeah, Joey Porter Jr. is going to take his lumps, man. He is completely getting reworked in terms of his technique, which means you're going to see rough patches, which is fine. Broderick Jones is the same way. Yeah. And I think that's kind of okay if the long-term benefit's there, right? I think that the secondary is going to be fine early on. I think you can comfortably play Pat Pete and Levi Wallace and get a few guys there in the slot with KZ, maybe Shandon Sullivan. You have a few guys there that could play the slot. You have enough DBs in that room to not play Joey or Trice early. That's the cool thing. So I think that they can have opportunities. That being said, I think they will play early. I think that Joey Porter Jr.'s ability to learn quickly is going to help him a lot. I think Trice has everything you want from a physical standpoint. It's just going to be kind of fixing his issues too. He's a little rawer than Joey in a lot of ways. So I think that's going to be the big thing. But man, they're going to be a team that's going to run a lot of different coverages. They're going to do a lot of diverse things. Mike Tomlin's never really stuck to one specific philosophy, right? He's never been known as like a Vic Fangio cover 2 guy. He does a little bit of everything. It's kind of like, the sweet and the sour. He puts everything together and mixes it all up into like a melting pot. So, they're going to do that, but they're going to be aggressive. They're going to bring a lot of pressure. They'll have a really good defensive line. That is no doubt about that. Their D-line's going to be one of the best in the NFL as long as it stays healthy. There's really no weak point on that line. You look from Watt to Hayward to whoever starts at the nose, probably Keanu Benton, to Ogunjobi to Highsmith, and now with Marcus Golden as a rotational rusher. They have just everyone you want. I think the one weakness is the linebackers. I don't like the inside linebackers. I would
like to see them make at least one more move at the inside spots to put somebody, either something that can overtake either Roberts or Holcomb, or just some depth behind them, because right now it's Mark Robinson and who else is behind them at the inside spot? I truly don't know.
It's Tanner Muse and Chappelle Russell. I mean, that is what it is. It's not good, right?
Yeah.
I suggested that they signed Deion Jones earlier this week. I still think that wouldn't be bad. And why? Yeah. Deion Jones's coverage tape is pretty good. His run tape is terrible. But I'm okay with that because at that point you're specializing your inside linebacker. Because Elandon Roberts is a really good run defender, but terrible in coverage. So they offset each other.
If you have guys who are really good situationally and you can rotate them in and out, that is perfectly fine and what they need right now.
Exactly. I think that they could specialize this inside linebacker room. Holcomb can be your 3-down guy. Mm-hmm. Then you can have Robertson Jones or whoever that guy, Quan Alexander. I don't care who it is. You can have them rotate in and out. I think that they need to make a move there. They only have 5 guys. I mean, that's just not much, period. It's not even like enough for like a competition, right? There's not really much competition going on when you have 5 inside linebackers. Now, listen, Nick Herbig will probably move there eventually to start working with them. He's only working with the outside backers right now. At least that's what he said. So we'll see. Kind of, I think he'll start to float over there more into training camp, but I think they need to sign someone. I think for competition's sake, I think for someone to be that coverage specialist, I think they need that, and they don't really have it right now. So yeah,
They haven't had it for a long time too. I mean, remember that
no,
year, Devin Bush's rookie year was fantastic, as we all know the story, and then he bangs up the knee and whatnot. They try with guys like Miles Jack, who came in. They had Joe Schobert for a minute, and they thought that these guys would kind of, be that coverage guy. None of them really turned out to be that. I would like to see them bring in, like you said, like a Deion Jones, who just somebody who can specialize in being a coverage backer in those situations.
yeah, and I mean, you look at what they've done, right, in terms of actually trying to fill that hole since Ryan Shazier got hurt, and they really haven't been able to. It's been that long. So, yeah, inside linebacker is the biggest concern. It's still going to be a good defense regardless of what the inside linebackers are like, because to be quite honest with you, they have too much talent to not be good in that defense, and they're going to play a lot of aggressive different coverages and blitzes. They're going to get a lot of turnovers this year. That's for sure. That's become a staple with them under Terrell Austin, but I think they could be one of the top defenses if they fix that inside linebacker situation versus just being a really good defense.
I haven't been this excited about an offseason in a while for the Steelers. And I'm excited to see what comes, especially in preseason when we see all these guys play. I'm excited to see you throughout the preseason, maybe throughout the regular season at a few games. Why not? We'll see how many trips I make down to the Berg. Why not? It's good to see you as always, buddy. What do you have going on in terms of writing and stuff this week?
Yeah, got everything on Steelers Now. Writing takeaways, features, whatever you want. Sights and sounds, you want to catch a little bit of the action. They play music now right after Chase Claypool leaves, so he's probably going to be a little salty about that. But, they do a lot of good stuff. Everything's over there at Steelers Now. We're writing, like, a ton of stuff. So over there, also my social media has, like, everything you want about OTAs this week. Nobody's got better coverage. That's humbly saying that, but check it out.
Now, if you are a Steelers fan, yes, follow Nick Farabaugh on Twitter. You will get all of your loves and your needs very much taken care of. In terms of me, 32 quarterbacks, 32 non-football comps coming out tomorrow on USA Today. So if you're watching this on Friday, it's already out. So go and read that. There's a lot of goofy stuff in there. It's that point in the year where we make pieces like that just to kind of kill time and try to get some sort of content out. So go read that. 32 quarterbacks, 32 non-football related comps. I'll tell you, one of them is mint chocolate chip ice cream. And if you like mint chip ice cream, maybe you'll like the comp that I made for said quarterback. Nick Farabaugh, always good catching up with you, buddy. We'll do a lot more of this throughout the offseason. Can't wait to chop it up with you in 2023, bud.
Yep.
See you guys.